The litigation and the conveyancing actually, like you say, goes hand in hand in some instances.
Our system of deeds registration is probably one of the best in the world. It's highly effective and it's highly accurate. What conveyancing is the process of taking the property out of the seller's name and putting the property into the purchaser's name.
What do you think, from your experience, a seller can do, especially a first-time seller, to make the transfer process easier?
A conveyancer has a duty to both the buyer and the seller. He doesn't act for either of them.
I've just accepted an offer to purchase on my property. What would the first step be in that transfer process? I think even the word transfer process is new to people, so if you can elaborate a little bit.
That's one of the things that we pride ourselves in, is the moment something's going south, we get everybody in, including the agent, and we make sure we don't open the door until it's resolved.
Neil, thank you so much for joining us today for another one of our episodes for RealTalkSA. I'd love to start by just allowing you to tell us a little bit about yourself, your firm, what it is that you guys do.
We are a specialist firm of conveyancers, and we also do deceased estates. We've been doing it for a hell of a long time now. And we stick to our knitting. We do what we do. I've personally got a background in litigation and commercial work, which I did for 20 years, and then I moved across to the conveyancing space. I think that gives us a great edge in understanding how all of the law fits together, so that when you get the inevitable disputes in a conveyancing matter or in a deceased estates matter, we can provide a full service in terms of resolving issues. We've got 3 offices. Our main office is in Durban North. We've got a Maritzburg lodgement office, and we've also just opened up a Hillcrest office. Once again, focusing purely on deceased estates and conveyancing.
Okay, great. And I mean, the litigation and the conveyancing actually, like you say, goes hand in hand in some instances.
Yes, we try and avoid litigation like the plague because it's very seldom in anybody's best interest. But I know what to do if it goes there. But we spend a lot of time mediating. And I find there are always disputes in a conveyance, well, there's very often disputes in a conveyancing matter, and having the people sit in a boardroom or sit around a table together looking into each other's eyes is a very effective way of resolving the disputes rather than trying to sort it out over email. So that's one of the things that we pride ourselves in, is the moment something's going south, we get everybody in, including the agent, and we make sure we don't open the door until it's resolved.
Yeah. No, 100%. So today we want to talk a little bit more about, I'm a first-time seller. My property is sold. Now what? So basically, we just want to know, I've just accepted an offer to purchase on my property. What would the first step be in that transfer process? I think even the word transfer process is new to people.
Okay.
So if you can elaborate a little bit.
Okay, could I take a step backwards
and
just explain how the transfer process works in South Africa, and then I'll go and explain what the seller needs to do to slot into that process. So our system of deeds registration is probably one of the best in the world. It's highly effective and it's highly accurate. But to keep it accurate is really the trick. So as a result, there are rules and rules and rules, and more exceptions even than rules. And the main reason for that is that this was brought together with Jan van Riebeeck in the 1650s. It's Roman Dutch-based land ownership, and it's had to evolve into the modern world. When we first started our deeds offices in South Africa, there was no electricity, there was no telephones, there were no emails, there was literally nothing. But the system has had to be modified to take into account all of these new technologies. And it's actually done quite a good job. The problem, of course, is that it's become quite creaky and it's held together with bubble gum and string, but it works very effectively. The downside to this is that the process is complicated. A lot of people think that conveyancing is a plug-and-play operation. And yes, we do have computer programs that do help us. And once you fill in a person's name once and the ID number, it pulls everything through. But there's so much more to conveyancing, apart from the potential disputes between buyers, sellers, agents. Just to get a job through the deeds office is you need to be specialized in what you're doing. And just to explain, in South Africa there are 10 or 11, I'm not sure exactly, deeds offices, and every single piece of land in South Africa has been surveyed by land surveyors. And so there's an owner for every piece of land in South Africa. And depending on where the land is situated, a deeds office will have a record of that ownership. And so what conveyancing is the process of taking the property out of the seller's name and putting the property into the purchaser's name. Right. It's normally about an 8 to 10 week process, and there's a whole lot of ballet moves that need to take place for this to happen effectively and efficiently. So when a seller sells his property, the first thing that happens is the estate agent will obviously complete the sale agreement and make sure both buyer and seller sign, and then they will send us the instruction. Okay, sometimes the agents wait until the purchaser's bond is approved. Other times they don't. We prefer to get going sooner rather than later because there are log jams in the process that the sooner we start, the better. Okay, so the seller really doesn't have to do anything once he signed the sale agreement. He needs to rely on the estate agent to instruct the attorney. Very important for the seller to know that he is the one that chooses the conveyancer, and there's a very good reason for that. A conveyancer's job is basically to be a ham and this between two slices of bread, ham in the sandwich. And we've got to look after the money, and we've got to look after the ownership of the property and make sure that ownership and money transfer at the same time. And the problem is if the purchaser's attorney becomes that trusted person, most often it's the purchasers that don't perform. And the seller's now going to have an attorney that's not really on his side, having to put his own client into breach or into more or something like that. So really, there's a good reason for the seller to choose. And I strongly suggest that is reinforced sort of by the agents to the sellers.
I think that's so important because even earlier today we had a situation where, the buyer's like, no, I've got my own conveyancer. But again, it's the responsibility then of the agent to educate,
Yes.
to say, no, actually, according to the law, the seller needs to nominate their own conveyancer. However, if they don't have a conveyancer, then the agent may suggest somebody.
Yes. Okay, so normally what the agents do is they would say, look, the seller might say, I don't know any lawyers, I don't know what a conveyancer is. The agent then, I think the best practice is to say, look, we've had good experience with 3 firms. These are the names, you choose one. Because there are rules about not being able to force work towards certain conveyancers and that. So I think that's a nice, fair way of dealing with it. And you're providing a proper service to your seller, and an honest service, yeah.
Great. And then what do you think, from your experience, a seller can do, especially a first-time seller, to make the transfer process easier?
Okay. There's a lot that they can do, and there's one big word that springs to mind, and that's FICA. Okay, now FICA is the strangest piece of legislation. I think it originated from the 9/11 terrorist attacks, and it's designed basically as a sledgehammer to swat flies. So what it does is all the innocent people just have been bogged down tremendously with admin, but the crooks still get away with it. So yeah, sadly FICA's with us. But before we can even invest any money that the purchaser pays, before we in theory, before we even start on a file, we need to know our client. That's both the buyer and the seller, and we pick up tremendous resistance from buyers and sellers to provide us with this painful FICA documentation, which they might have already provided to the estate agent, because the estate agent also has to get this documentation. And then if your buyer or seller is something like a company or a trust, all the beneficiaries, shareholders, directors need to be FICA'd as well. So it's a very painful process for all concerned. If you want your transfer to go through smoothly and quickly, please just help us and get your FICA as efficiently as possible. Most of the work at the beginning is done by the purchaser, quite honestly. The seller's done his job. He provides his FICA. The purchaser then has to come up with a deposit. The purchaser then has to apply for his bond. And so what we found best practice to be is our conveyancing paralegals. We work extensively with the residential property market. So we're used to people that don't understand the process. And obviously agents also need to know what's going on. So we've got a system of reporting every Friday on every single conveyancing file. But more importantly, when we receive an instruction, the paralegal stops what she's doing and she makes contact with buyer, seller, makes a phone call, and then sends them a letter asking them to do what they need to do. And from the seller's point of view, it's mostly FICA. And yeah, in due course, They will need to have all the certificates done. You get your electrical compliance, your gas compliance, electric fence, and wood borer certificate. In the Cape, they've also got a plumbing certificate. And very often the agents are involved in doing that. It is a cost for the seller. But yeah, that's really the seller's job. Everything is now up to the buyer, and the agent, if they're prudent, will be chasing that bond as much as they can.
No, exactly. And I love the updates on a Friday because we obviously have used and still do your firm for some of our transfers. Yeah. It's so helpful. The agent's also copied into that correspondence, and they can then drive whatever is needed to still get from the purchaser or even the seller in that case. Yeah. So it's really a tripartite kind of, everyone puts in their little bit of effort to make it work at the end of the day.
Yes.
So what would you say, how long does the process normally take?
Well, historically, it's tended to vary because we've had challenges, for example, with SARS and rates departments. But essentially, between 8 and 12 weeks is considered reasonable. I think our record is 16 days, and everyone occasionally gets lucky, and it goes like that. But it can take 2 years if somebody dies halfway through the process, you've got to wait for an executor to be appointed. But generally, a transfer should be between 8 to 12 weeks. And we don't have to do it within that time. If the parties agree, both of them, to slow it down, we can slow it down with pleasure. And if they want us to speed it up, as long as we get agreement from both sides, the very important for the public to know, a conveyancer has a duty to both the buyer and the seller. He doesn't act for either of them. And if they get into an unresolvable dispute, he has to pull back and advise each of them to consult their own attorneys. So in the conveyancing process, we use the agreement as our Bible. And if one of the parties asks us to do something, first of all, you look and see if we're entitled to in terms of the agreement. And if we aren't, we say to that party, well, let's talk to the other side and see if they're in agreement with that. And in fact, if they are, we do a little addendum and everybody's happy. It's when there's unmet expectations that problems arise.
Great. And then if anybody would like to reach out to Tate, Nolan and Knight for any advice or, anything like that, where would be the best place for them to get hold of you?
Well, probably our main office in Durban. The telephone number is 031 563 1874. My cell phone number 082-808-6281. And we operate on a very hands-on approach. Anybody in the firm is able to be spoken to about any matter. We don't know each other's matters, but we can, we've got a very flat organizational structure, and we've been through hell together with COVID and all of those things. So we're a tight-knit team, and we thoroughly enjoy what we do, and we get quite excited when things go well. Yeah.
No, that's great. So we'll also put that information in the comments below. So thank you so much for joining us today. We really, really appreciate your time, and we'll definitely see you on another episode, hopefully.
Fantastic, Mia. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Neil.